All right. Coming at you all the way live from the lower bottoms of West Oakland. This is Revolution. And if you listened to the show before, I've mentioned it quite often that I work with the unhoused population. And not just work, but up until very recently, pretty much lived among them. Very recently, I was until like last month, pretty much. And my guest today has been on a couple times, and we constantly have. I call the episode part 1, part 2, and this is just part 3 in this episodic conversations that this gentleman and I have. His name is Kelvin Martinez. He also worked with the unhoused population, but in Southern California. And we met each other via Twitter. I think he has what you young people call fire tweets. I want to read a little bit of something that he has on his Twitter that I think is pretty important. There's a mischaracterization against unhoused Angelenos that officials use to defend sweeps and policing as strategies. It says many people don't want or are resistant to services. Policing does not address this phenomenon and in fact makes it much worse. Relationships are crucial to the effective services. People often refuse services because they've had terrible experiences with providers and their services. Any effective services are reliant on building trust with a community that has endless reasons and examples not to trust city efforts. Unreliable and paternalistic services, unpleasant shelters, condescending providers, policing and sweeps all corrode the trust between unhoused residents and the city. This constant neglect, abuse, and paternalism is a very understandable reason that people refuse services. City officials are complacent with bad services because they only care about appeasing voters by making the argument that they've done the best they can. Then, when their ill-informed, poorly executed services don't work, they blame unhoused Angelenos. So I'll stop right there. The thread actually goes on a little bit longer. I'll be here all show reading it. But that to me is the nail on the freaking head. Recently at the shelter, I do want to shout this out. There's a very nice person that hit me up personally and asked me, and he wasn't trying to change the world and he wasn't trying to take selfies for gratification, so I won't even say his name. I don't know if he wants me to say his name. But this gentleman called me up and asked me, Jason, I usually give out about $400 worth of gift cards for the unhoused for Christmas. He goes, do you know where I can drop some off? I know things are a little different right now. And I said, well, yeah, things are a little different right now. You might get fucked up. Would you mind going to one of the hotels that I was at? Because they would really like it because there's nothing going on for them for Christmas. And this gentleman did it. People were happy. It made a difference. I got some phone calls. They made me cry. And he knows that he's not trying to change the world with some gift cards. He just wanted to be decent on Christmas, right? That being said, there was a big influx of people that had came in right before he had got there because a shelter had an outbreak. This is a common occurrence that shelters have COVID outbreaks. So they send them to whatever quarantining hotel if the city has enough space or your county has enough space. And as a friend of mine is taking all these intakes in, doing the best she can, she literally cries every day she leaves and every day she gets there because the job is that hard to deal with. Because there's people that have been in these hotels we've been dealing with for about a year now. And the person looked at her and said, I would get better service at the SPCA. And she's sitting there, so stressed out from the job. And you see the daily grind of seeing people just perpetually stuck in a rut and understanding that your position sometimes doesn't get them out of said rut. All that being said, I'd like to welcome onto the show my guest, my homie, my dog, Kelvin Martinez.
Yo, thank you so much. I'm really, really glad to be back and just really excited to have a conversation. And I just really appreciate you also what you're doing here with this podcast and like creating a platform for ideas and conversations that need to be had on the left. And I'm just excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Kelvin shares stuff on Twitter. He was the first person that I saw that was sharing a situation that I've talked about definitely on this show and on a live stream. A situation where on Thanksgiving, I don't know how many people got evicted. It was like one or two families. It wasn't even that many families that got evicted. It was just the fact the way they did it was so just evil.
Yeah, I think it might have been 4 or 5 houses actually.
Was it 4 or 5 houses? I knew it wasn't like a ton of houses, but still, just the way they did it. There's police. No, I'm sorry. Is this the sheriff's department and Caltrans, which is our transportation system?
Actually, the California Highway Patrol.
And the Highway Patrol was there too?
Yeah.
Go ahead and tell the story, brother. Tell us. Let me shut up.
Yeah. So what's been going on? This has been sort of a low-lying, latent situation that's been going on for a long time. It's actually one of the first actions that I went to when the pandemic started. It was the weekend of the first lockdown, and there were reclaimers. Those are the folks who are basically deciding that these houses shouldn't stay vacant. They need the houses because they're housing insecure. Some of these people have lived in these houses before, and were no longer are there. They're seeing these houses in El Sereno that have been vacant for years because of a defunct highway project that's no longer gonna take place, and they've decided we're going to reclaim these homes. There's no point in these 200 homes sitting there vacant when people, families, need somewhere to stay. So I think it was back in March when the first phase of this happened. And there was sort of a blockade outside the house to protect them from law enforcement. And that situation ended up kind of moving the needle in the favor of the reclaimers because the governor recognized that these houses shouldn't be vacant, especially with Los Angeles having the homelessness population that it does. And I want to give credit where it's due, and so I don't want to misinform here. But the reclaimers are associated with a land trust in El Sereno that the city is, or maybe it might be the state, is selling to the land trust, so that the land trust can use these homes as affordable housing. Well, of course, the way that anything goes in like our bureaucratic system, that is moving tremendously slowly. At a ridiculous rate. So that first action happened in March. They set a precedent, that these homes are for people who are housing unstable, and it's a dire situation. It's a crisis that we're in, a massive crisis. And so over Thanksgiving, I think the reclaimers were taking into consideration that it was a holiday. Also, some of these reclaimers are also BIPOC folks, and we're recognizing this is land that was stolen. This is land that does not have legitimate cause into the U.S. government, and moved into these homes with support from community members, with also blockades supporting them against CHP, California Highway Patrol, from kicking them out. Why is California Highway Patrol there? Well, because this was supposed to be a highway project. So all of these properties are technically owned by Caltrans. And so that's where we are in this bureaucratic nightmare of this situation, because what does Caltrans know about housing? What responsibility does anybody at Caltrans feel about the homelessness crisis. They think that they're dealing with something else. Meanwhile, they're holding on to 200 homes that are sitting there completely vacant. So these families moved in on Thanksgiving. They, in the first action, I remember the first thing that they did when they moved into the homes, they planted a garden outside.
I read that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just like, this is, they're setting down roots. They're taking care of this property. This isn't, some articles would refer to them as squatters, and that is so far from the case. This is people trying to live their lives, take care of their children, and be flourishing community members, uh, and this was just a continuation of that action, really. Of course, what happened is that they were met with state violence. They were met with, uh, I know you mentioned that you've talked about it on the show, but I mean, these cops moved into this. They rolled into this house with a barricade. They with a what is it? Those ramrods that like break down the door, and then they ended up hog tying a teenager uh, to arrest them. There's all this video of protesters outside the house trying to protect the people inside the house, and they're blessing the officers with sage. They're chanting prayers, and what are the officers doing but hitting them with batons, pushing them through in full riot gear? I mean, it was such a I keep kind of laughing to myself about how Joe Biden's campaign talks about the soul of America.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, this was a real clear representation of what the soul of America looks like. We are continuing the colonialism and the displacement of BIPOC people, and we're doing that in order to protect capital. Um, so that's the situation as far as I saw it. To be clear, I was also I was following it closely on Twitter. I took the day off from going to actions and saw what I was missing out on, and so felt the need to really start to amplify it. And I'm glad it got the attention that it did. But those houses are still vacant. They're completely vacant. So I don't know what Kevin De Leon, who's the representative of that area, Eric Garcetti, folks in the county, folks at Caltrans. This implicates so many of these politicians who are just clearly these empty suits. It seems hard to consider that they have any conviction around this situation, because those homes are still empty in the middle of so many crises. I mean, we're dealing with 60,000 people living on the streets in the middle of a pandemic.
And you're
I mean,
talking about just your area, just LA.
yes, that's just LA. That's
It's
just LA.
totally different where I am 6 hours north of you
Right.
in the Bay Area. We have a problem as well. We were able to fill up our hotels a little better than you guys, but that's not because of lack of trying. And many of those are being shut down anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I had a guest on right around the time the pandemic started. I would say no, I take it back. Maybe summer, named Randy Shaw, and he actually does a lot of work with the homeless population here in San Francisco, and has written several books on housing. And we talked about the building of affordable housing and how that whole thing works. And I know it was a bit of a bureaucratic challenge because Caltrans bought single family residences
Mm.
in the El Sereno neighborhood, and trying to turn single family residences into low income housing or whatever affordable housing. There's all these weird caveats and rules. There was an article that came out in the Times recently, uh, kind of as a congratulatory, doing a great job with the Room Key project here in California, and Home Key, which was actually getting houses because the state bought so many hotels.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I've said this before, and I'll definitely say it again. those hotels are never placed in, like, it's not the Marriott.
Mm-hmm.
There actually is one here. That was a
There's one Marriott. Yeah.
There was a Marriott here. There was a Marriott here in actually Silicon Valley area. Most people will call it Silicon Valley. There was a Marriott there off the freeway, and it wasn't what you would think of as a Marriott, but it was a nicer hotel. But most of these hotels are in areas where there's a lot of poor people. There's definitely a lot of people of color, and there's definitely a lot of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like real time redlining.
Yeah.
And with the reclaiming of houses, I don't know that area that well. But what is that area? The El Sereno area, because I know those houses are kind of they're all over the place in the area. It's not like one whole block, right?
Yeah, they're all over. Yeah, I mean the area is predominantly Latino.
Okay.
It's an interesting area for the current time of what's going on in LA. So like the LA Times just had to move their headquarters to El Sereno
Oh
uh,
no shit.
because their downtown office was too pricey for them. They got basically the LA Times got priced out of the heart of LA. And so now the LA Times is in El Sereno. So you can imagine, I think, what that means for that area and that community coming up in the next decade. I think it's already seen some gentrification where people are coming in, buying houses, starting to flip them. But I think it's kind of on the beginning end of what's to come there. I don't know how much of that has been factored into what's going on with these houses, but I would not be surprised if that is certainly on the radar.
It's maddening to me because what you described, and we have left this out of what we're talking about, happened on Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is the day that everybody has a feel good story, and philanthropists and football players go down to the community and hand out turkeys to poor people and all this other stuff. It happened on that day.
Yep.
And it didn't get the media coverage that I think it deserved. It didn't get the media coverage that the Moms for Housing got in Oakland. And I feel that this was probably more violent because you saw the police busting heads. With the Moms for Housing in Oakland, hey, that shit happened in the daytime, most of the stuff that went down. And police just didn't bust any heads.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see the sheriff's department, who has a horrible reputation right now, and historically has a horrible reputation, and you're telling me the Highway Patrol and Caltrans out there busted heads on camera, but the media sphere is more concerned about the bullshit that Donald Trump says, or the color of Joe Biden's cabinet, or congratulating Kamala Harris because she checks like 75 boxes of diversity as the first female, Black-ish, Indian-ish, Jamaican-ish, long-haired, like you name it, and
It's just another version of exploitation of identity.
oh yes, and then I read your tweets, and then another show guest that I met through you and your Twitter, Christy Lovitch.
Yeah.
They're always so based in real action.
Yeah.
And real things that are happening on the ground, and it's never pretend politics that a lot of people do on Twitter. And it's always like, hey, do you have a tent? There's a family that's about to get evicted. Can you help with the tent? And if so, if you could just help with money, then give it to this account right here, and this is where the people are. Da, 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 da. Like all the time, real shit really happening.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is honestly a conversation that I wish was happening on a broader scale on the left. Of
Mm-hmm.
like, what the hell is Twitter and what are we doing on it, right? Because like yeah, I think you were, I don't know if you said it while we were recording, but you mentioned like, if it weren't for the show, you might not be on Twitter, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like everybody knows Twitter is a bad news machine. It is just depression in an app, you know, and in app form. And so like what the hell are we doing on there, right? And like I think that my relationship to it really has changed this past year, because for years I've been on Twitter and haven't, really been that interested in what's going on, just like following the news, seeing what's going on with Bernie Sanders and hoping he could get elected president and this and the
Mm-hmm.
other. But actually what I saw in this past year was I started seeing a couple of accounts that maybe you're familiar with, maybe not, K-Town for All,
Yeah.
People's City Council. And that sort of like woke me up to like what this platform can be, because they are using Twitter to organize, like just specifically to organize. I mean, they don't need check marks, and they don't need 10 or 15,000 followers. With a couple thousand followers, they're putting out calls to say, hey, we have an action going on here. We need help. Hey, Street Watch is doing the same thing. Hey, we need tents for the folks staying in this park. Who can bring one? And I think that's where you know, I think that the left has a lot to offer in that sense. If we could get out of having the conversation that is shaped by the network media and that's shaped by the Republican or the Democratic platform, and start talking about, hey, this whole building is going to get evicted. We need an eviction blockade. We need to
Mm-hmm.
stop the sheriffs from coming in here and evicting these folks.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's building power, and I think that is something that we need to do more of. We need to start building, and people are doing it. I'm not trying to say that I'm the first one saying this. I'm just maybe so. Uh, um, I'm just praising the folks who are doing that. I think BLMLA is a master at this. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I was I was showing up at the Block Garcetti protests. Which
Mm-hmm.
was 24 straight days of protests in front of the mayor's house, and uh, so much of the success around that was, of course, because of BLM's like tight knit organizing, and just like you know so focused and know exactly how to get folks to show up at these actions and be committed to the process. But I think also because LA has started to knit together a very committed uh, social network on places like Twitter and Instagram, where it's not just where you're arguing back and forth with bots, but where you're able to look. I see this person tweeting. I see that person at an action when I'm there. And it's starting to become a very a militant network for justice. A militant network to confront state violence. And I think that I really wish that those of us on the left would start to recognize the opportunity and the power that is in a place like Twitter. If we could treat it like an organizing space, if we could treat it like a canvassing space, if we could treat it like a place where we're waking people up and we are radicalizing folks to care about their neighbors, to join in their identity as a tenant, and to get together with their tenant association, to join an organization who's doing work. I mean, I think that is where we could spend a lot more time um, talking about those things and building those networks than having some of these conversations where we're just trying to valorize these podcast hosts or whatever, trying to defend who's my brand of socialism or my brand of justice
Yeah.
or whatever it is.
Do you think this is probably going to sound silly?
Go for it.
Uh, I was having this conversation with another show guest, Torrey Reed.
Oh yeah.
We were having it off air. We back and forth quite a bit. And one idea it kind of popped into my head was, it's the I don't think you're a sports fan, right? You're not a sports fan, are you?
I was before the pandemic.
Gotcha. So I'm a sports fan. I'm not gonna lie, but football specifically,
Yeah.
and I have issues with it. Um, I feel like because sports isn't what it's used to being, a lot of people that would have been in that sphere have drifted towards politics.
Yes. Yes.
And I would even say last year, some of the people that I could tweet back and forth with, and there's a few of us lefty football fan, not many, but even they're gone because everybody's so involved in, to your point, what YouTuber to love or hate. And I feel like the pandemic has people locked inside, and that's changed a lot. I don't think that we'd see the protests to the level that we see them at, because it's not like this is the first time we saw brothers get killed by the police on camera.
Yeah. Yep.
So, and couple that with a president that ad nauseum on any form of media that you watch is shown, and it doesn't even matter the light that he's shown in. He just sucks up a lot of the oxygen.
Yes.
And I feel like a lot of what we saw is a reaction to that, and then the fear reaction of I don't know, because we don't know when this is over. There's a horrible rollout of a vaccine that, and I am not, I will preface this by saying, and I always preface this by saying, I am not an anti-vaxxer at all. My children all have had vaccines, but my wonderful woman that I date and live with and have a child with works in medical research, and she's pointed out, she's been a guest on the show and pointed it out, that a lot of what you're seeing is people going through old stuff that never really hit market or didn't catch on and just running it up a flagpole as a vaccine.
Mm.
And as far as results being positive, they got to deem what was a positive result. So if your temperature went from 104 to 101, well, that shit's positive, and we're going to roll it out. And the effectiveness, the efficacy, and all the those numbers have to do with an entire group taking it. So the fact that you don't have 330 million doses of whatever vaccine you have, if it works or if it doesn't.
Yeah.
B, even if you did, there is no way to roll it out. C, the capitalist system has shown us that it is not equipped to handle any sort of pandemic, like an emergency, because it wasn't cost effective to keep the stockpile and have someone monitor that. And for the pharmaceutical companies, it was not cost effective in 2006, when we were first finding out about these zoonotic viruses, to create a vaccine for those. And how this all relates to the homeless population is, so you have this population of people extremely vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
And the rollout to help them feels like more of a bailout to the hotel industry
Absolutely.
than it was really for the people that you're helping. Because again, $500 million is a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
We can't lie and say it's not a lot of money. But LA alone spent like $1 billion last year to house 7,000 people.
Yep.
And 500 million went for the state.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like something that is coming up for me as you're talking is this idea that I've been kind of thinking about, which is just the idea of our institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it's something that can go kind of unconscious a lot. Like, do you trust the institutions or not? You
Mm-hmm.
know, and we're kind of dealing with this on a daily basis, right? You go to the grocery store, you get a I don't know, let's say you get a pack of snacks, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's some level of either trust or ignorance that we're going with, that what's in this food is approved by our institutions, right?
Yeah.
That our institutions won't let something poisonous or won't let something, direly unhealthy go into these foods. But what we see with our eyes over and over, and what we've seen throughout this pandemic, is that none of these institutions are working as we expect them to
Mm-hmm.
work, or how we would like them to work, or how a lot of people need them to work in order to survive. So even just with that example is that, our food, now it is a luxury to eat food that's not sprayed with poison. That's a luxury. That's what capitalism has gotten us to the point of. And much less, like, if we can't agree on people have a right to eat food that's not poisoned, and it shouldn't be, whether you can afford it or not. It shouldn't be that only the wealthy can eat non-poisonous food. Um, it becomes so much harder to say, hey, there's a pandemic going on, and we need to get people inside to protect them. That seems or the idea of canceling rent within this capitalist system. Those things are so far out of our imagination, but we continue to sort of rely on these institutions and sort of pretend like they're working. And that's sort of this Biden mentality of like, look, we're going to go back to normal and nothing fundamentally is going to change. Of course, even before this, our institutions have been failing us over and over and over again. And so, I hear that is not a leftist critique. That is just an observation. Our institutions are not working. And
Mm-hmm.
this explains a lot, of course, on top of racism and so many other things, explains Trumpism in general also. What Trump ran on and won on was, these institutions don't work. We need to drain the swamp, right? And that part rang true to a lot of conservatives, of course, with racist dog whistling and all sorts of other things as well. But this idea that things are not how they should be, and this candidate is saying that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Hillary Clinton ran on the idea that we're going to continue what's going on. The
Mm-hmm.
reality is, like, we don't have trust in these institutions, and that's why uh, we're that's why there's a very understandable anxiety around the vaccine. Most of us don't know how vaccines get rolled out or what's a proper protocol. We have to listen to somebody else who is an expert,
Yep.
but these experts are validated by institutions that we're not sure if we trust anymore.
Yep.
And that falls to the right and to the left. Again, this is just an observation of what's going on, and so it puts us in a really I'm always seeing things through an existential lens, and I sort of see that as highly existential, because now we can't rely on these institutions and these leaders to tell us what makes sense for us to do. We have to make those decisions ourselves, right? So we're seeing conservatives, anti-maskers, pro-Trumpers, whatever, making a big statement about how they're going to go somewhere without a mask, and showing, oh, you're all living in fear, and don't trust the government, even though
We
they're
are.
yeah. And so, and then I remember at the beginning of the pandemic thinking myself, like, I don't know what I can trust from what we're hearing from the media, from there's just the conversation in general around what's going on with the pandemic, and feeling like, well, we're going to have to make decisions for what's right for me and for my family and the people I live with. And I remember thinking, like, we're going to have to shield ourselves and think about this very cautiously and thoroughly from our own perspective, and without reliance on assuming that Eric Garcetti or Gavin Newsom have our best interest in mind, and and I feel like that feeling has been validated over and over. I mean, you were mentioning Project Roomkey, moving folks who are unhoused, moving them into hotels during the pandemic. In LA, there were supposedly 15,000 rooms that were promised to be used for Project Roomkey. Project Roomkey peaked in September at 3,000 rooms.
Yep.
And now it's down to about 2,000 rooms occupied. And it's down to 2,000 rooms, and it's the current infection rates are 10 times what they were in September. So this is a systemic institutional failure. And part of it is because Project Roomkey, in my opinion, it doesn't seem like it was actually intended to help unhoused folks in LA, at least. It seems like it was used in order to get some heat off of the mayor and off of the city council for doing nothing about homelessness.
That's how apparently it rolled out within weeks of the pressure that Newsom was getting. I want to say from Southern California about Southern California organizations that deal with homeless folks about, hey, where are you going to put the homeless folks?
Yeah.
Where are you going to put? You are only as safe as the most vulnerable of you. So that was the first criteria was you had to be a vulnerable person in a vulnerable population. So think about that logic in and of itself. So you're talking about you're already homeless. Now you got homeless people with diabetes, heart conditions, or severely mentally ill.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm throwing you in a hotel with no services.
Yep.
And I'm not hiring from within the system. I'm just getting whoever I can that has no knowledge of this.
Yeah, exactly.
And because they're easier to keep the yahoos in line and they won't really ask a lot of questions. So, and even the nonprofit I was at, I knew the people that took that job on because nonprofits are the ones, not every single hotel, but mostly nonprofits are going to be the ones that are running them.
Yep.
That's promotion time for you.
Yeah.
You're going to take that job on, and as long as nobody dies in your building, you're good.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened at what the place I was at. It was extremely violent. We had all kinds of problems between workers having COVID and them not telling us, and outbreaks with caregivers.
Yeah.
And people got promoted.
Mm-hmm.
It was a cash grab for the hotel industry, definitely, because they got paid full occupancy, standard rate.
Mm-hmm.
I'll repeat that again. They got paid full occupancy, standard rate. I don't know one person that pays standard rate at a hotel.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there's, I think that there's sort of a gut criticism that sometimes folks think of like, the state is paying for these hotel rooms and, this money is being squandered. It's like, there's no sticking power to this project. And I think that something that really shows how vile it is to me is that in LA, a lot of the hotels that currently, some of these really nice hotels were built with government subsidies. And yet we can't commandeer those hotel rooms to put unhoused folks in it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm questioning, why are we even paying these hotels these standard rates like this? Not only standard rates, but in some cases, why are we paying them at all? We've already helped them build this hotel to make mega profits off of.
Yep.
So why is it not okay now in a situation that is extremely dire, that we cannot enlist these hotels that we paid for as taxpayers in order to help relieve this crisis. I think that, to me, sums up exactly the state of capitalism that we're in right now, where we've created a class of people who are constantly getting help from the government, and those people are wealthy developers, people who are shaking hands with politicians and getting meetings with other folks in suits. And then we have a growing layer of people at the bottom who cannot make the case for I need help because the government simply will not listen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of this situation where, like, if you're homeless, if you're poor, if you're struggling with your housing, if you're struggling with your job, that's on you. And here's $600 to pay your landlord. Here's $2,000 to go straight to your landlord,
Yeah.
because that's who they care about. They care about the landlords. What they don't care about is tenants. What they don't care about is poor people. And it's to me, it feels like it's really unmasking this system as it is, and these parties as it is. We were talking about. You had mentioned before I came on that you wanted to talk about um, LA homelessness and the lack of federal response.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel so many different ways about this because I know that LA desperately needs help from the federal government to actually combat homelessness, and yet at the same time, I do not trust the Biden administration to come in here and do that in a way that's actually going to support people who are unhoused. Why? Because the person who's going to have his ear is Eric Garcetti. And Eric Garcetti has shown over and over again that the only solution he has to homelessness is incarceration, is displacing people, is throwing away people's items and allowing 4 people to die every day on our streets. And so if Garcetti is the person feeding Biden information, what hope do we really have if the federal government comes in? And
It's a frightening picture.
absolutely. It's so frightening. I mean, this is a mayor who called in the National Guard this year because people were protesting against police brutality. That's the person who's going to have the president's ear on how to deal with homelessness in LA. And it's hard for folks, I think, who aren't keeping up, to see Eric Garcetti this way, because he's got his slick haircut and he just kind of looks the part of like a comic strip politician, and it's he's truly a violent and vile leader. I mean, recently, I want to say his name is Rick Wilson, the staffer who in Biden's staff, who was harassing and abusing other staff members. The news came out that Garcetti was intentionally keeping him on staff because he was a known asshole. And that way, Garcetti didn't have to do any of his asshole measures towards his staff himself. He could just have his staffer, Rick Wilson, go and abuse and harass staff members on his behalf. I mean, that is exactly the way that Eric Garcetti works. He doesn't want to get his hands dirty, but he does not mind sending the LAPD to attack peaceful protesters. He doesn't mind calling in the National Guard. This is the state of the Democratic Party as well, for the most part.
I
It's
mean,
wild.
I'd like to also add that that's kind of been historically LA. I mean,
Yeah.
Tom Bradley, LA's first colored mayor in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken, his whole thing was, let's take the money we're generating from this remodeled airport and fund downtown. And that's what our project's going to be. Our project's going to be to fund downtown and to bring business interest in Los Angeles. And it never happened.
Nope.
Downtown's really expensive. It's a lot nicer than it was, I don't know, even 5 years ago. Like, I remember downtown LA in the 90s was not cool. And
Well, and that plan, Tom Bradley, was supposedly was creating. I mean, it didn't help support the folks who were already living downtown. The story
No.
of that is that what happened is it displaced so many people who are already living downtown, who'd lived there for generations, and who have never had the opportunity to uplift themselves. And the city didn't come in and help those folks, move up the ladder and get their feet, move up the ladder and get their feet on the ground. But uh, mixed metaphors there. But what they did was they went in and they displaced people who were living downtown, and that's exactly why we're seeing a big push against the Olympics as well in LA. That's supposed to be in 2028. Is that these projects, these
Yeah,
liberal
this
mayors
next
bring
door.
in these neoliberal projects to displace people. And yes, the place gets nicer, the place gets richer. We get fancy restaurants and all this stuff there, but it's not serving the people who actually live there. They're just making playgrounds for rich people.
Mm-hmm. For a
So
month.
yes, exactly.
Like I wish people could go to places where Olympics were, and you're always like scratching your head. Like go to Alberta. You're like, oh, wow, there's Olympics here. It's like, yeah, look at that big ice rink. That's what you get.
Yeah, exactly.
You know. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think that the premise of the Olympics is I think very it's very concerning to activists and organizers in LA right now, because we've seen the LAPD be extremely violent this year. And they're always violent, but this year, in particular, we've seen it in a different way. And of course, the LA sheriffs are. If you could some, it's hard to imagine somebody outshining the LAPD as a racist and violent force, and somehow the LA sheriffs have managed to do that. Um, and as the Olympics come in, we're going to see a lot of leeway given to law enforcement. They're going to have a lot more freedom to go around displacing people, to harass people. That is going to be the main strategy for getting prepared for the Olympics, uh, and it's really concerning. I think that it speaks to me of this being a city that, if it's continued to be run this way, we're failing. We're a failing city. I mean, we have 60,000 people living on the streets. That is a hard number to really even wrap your head around.
well, to your point about police violence, you are not a watcher of true crime, right?
I've had my goes with it.
Um, so I am a lover of all things true crime, and
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of the voice of Bill Curtis, who did American Justice on A&E for like 10 years. And there's a show on Netflix called The Innocence Files. And I'm going to try to make this all come together.
Go for it.
And on The Innocence Files, there's an episode where there's a young Latino kid that lives in an area called Linwood in Southern California. I don't know if you know where Linwood is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And he is part of a gang, a Latino gang, kind of by happenstance. His sister happens to be married to an OG in the gang, and he's just in it because family. He even says in the thing, because I've never even jumped in. Like, it's just kind of a thing. And I didn't do anything special differently. I was just a kid, 16 years old, I think he was. A drive-by shooting happens on the black side of town, and a father went out to tell his kids, hey, you guys are too loud outside. And he gets shot accidentally during this drive-by and dies. The LA County Sheriff's Department are rounding up suspects and definitely rounding up people that are going to talk. And they pretty much coerce a confession out of a young black kid. And this Latino kid gets blamed for the shooting. He wasn't even there when it happened. He ended up serving like 20 plus years in prison. it's on Netflix, so of course he gets out, and as you're watching it, you're going to constantly go like, I can't believe this happened, right? And then you find out that the sheriff's department, within the sheriff's department, they were pretty corrupt, and they were calling themselves the Vikings. And one judge even called them a neo-Nazi organization within the sheriff's department. They were just busting people's heads, fucking people up. But that was the modus operandi from the police chief and the chief before him and the chief before him. And if you want to get an interesting history on LA policing, watch LA Confidential.
Yeah.
If you want like the cool action-packed take with Guy Pearce, watch LA Confidential. So the police were told, and laws were passed, and there wasn't a lot of pushback on these laws.
Mm-hmm.
And this is before the omnibus crime bill.
Wow.
And from the black community, you had people saying, lock them up. Harry Edwards, who works for, he's a consultant. I'm using air quotes, a consultant, a high-paid consultant for the, what do you call it, the San Francisco 49ers, and some other teams. Even he was saying, he was asked in an interview, well, what do you do if you're, and this is like 1990, and he was asked in an interview, well, what do you do if your 13-year-old kid is caught selling crack? He goes, you lock him up, and you lock him up for a long time. All these leaders were saying, we need to lock these kids up. Punishment, 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 punishment.
Yep,
that's anything could get you locked up. If you were in a gang per se, or you were wearing the colors that they felt were gang colors, or the garb that police felt was gang garb, you're going to jail. And I mean, we can't lie. LA was violent. Where I'm from was violent at that time. It was scary.
Yeah. And I think that we see now just a continuation of that. I mean, I think that is I think when we're talking about homelessness, when we're talking about policing and sort of also how these liberal mayors and these liberal leaders are working, is I think the issue that kind of wraps it all into a nut for me is state violence, because liberals have ideas of how they think society should be, and it's in their mind rainbow colored and very peaceful or whatever. But the means by which they anticipate getting there is through violence. It is through economic violence, and it's through police violence as well. And that's why liberals in LA have been so terrible at dealing with homelessness, is because you cannot arrest your way out of homelessness. You cannot incarcerate your way out of homelessness. And yet that's sort of the only strategy they know. The same thing we see in the schools here in LA is just cram packed full of police officers. And the students are saying, we don't need police officers in our schools. And why is that? Because why is it that those police officers are there? And it's because liberals believe that the only way to handle something is through state violence. And they're thinking to themselves, we're different than conservatives because we're using it differently. Well, I don't really care if my mayor is a Republican or a liberal
Democrat.
At the end of the day, if their police force is bashing in the skulls of protesters and of people trying to make their community safer and of vulnerable people in their community, it doesn't matter which if you're a donkey or an elephant. Like what I care about is peace in this community, and we're not going to get peace by having these violent ass liberal white supremacists in office. And I think this is where, as I was mentioning about the way we're using Twitter and trying to build power, I think that is a message that we really need to start pumping to take over these cities, because a Republican's not going to get elected in LA, probably not as mayor, at least maybe a couple city council seats or something, but we can take over this LA City Council with enough constructive power. And that means treating Twitter like canvassing. It means using Twitter to organize. It means, getting to know your neighbors and starting to get people to identify themselves as tenants and getting to identify themselves as people who want a better city. And I don't think that folks like Eric Garcetti, I'm thinking also of Ted Wheeler up in Portland, they don't have a leg to stand on. They have completely abused their populations. And I think that there has been a big stroke of power. I hope I don't know how much attention this got from the media, but I think it's a case study that people need to pay attention to. What Black Lives Matter Los Angeles did with Eric Garcetti's potential cabinet position, it might not have gotten the amount of national attention I think it deserved, but it's going to matter here in LA. They hosted this protest. It was 24 days in a row. They incurred police violence for having a peaceful demonstration in front of the mayor's house, which taxpayers pay for. And what did that accomplish was blocking Eric Garcetti, who's clearly has close ties with Joe Biden, blocking his cabinet appointment to HUD or to Secretary of Transportation. Now that to a lot of people might not seem like a big deal, but what that matters is here in LA, because what that means is that 2 years from now, when Eric Garcetti is termed out and is no longer the mayor of LA, Black Lives Matter just showed a huge show of power that people who are running for mayor are going to need to listen to. Because if you don't have, and this goes also for the way that they ousted the DA, Jackie Lacey, electeds they're going to have to start listening to Black Lives Matter. They're going to have to start listening to on the ground organizers. And that's really what we need. We need politicians who are either aligned with or fearful of grassroots organizers, people who are on the ground, making their communities better, building power, protecting people from homelessness, protecting people from evictions, and showing that we are the ones who run this city. These streets belong to us. We keep us safe. And if you want to be elected, you're going to have to be listening to us, not to your development buddies, not to your big money constituents, but to the thousands of us who will organize against your ass.
Well, on that note, Kelvin and I are not quite done with this conversation, but if you'd like to hear the rest of this conversation and other conversations Kelvin has, go to the Patreon. There is a link in the description wherever you're listening to this show at. There's a link in the description to the Patreon. It's patreon.com/Bitter Lake Presents. And you can get bonus content from several of the shows and other shows that we've done just for the Patreon. And on that note, Kelvin, don't hang up.
Absolutely.